Hello and welcome to my reading wrap-up for May. I read so much this month, basically because I made my TBR for this month based on Jean Bookish Thoughts' Dragon Books video, which I'll link below, along with the one where she talked about Temeraire, because she didn't talk about that in her Dragon Books video, but it is a dragon book. It's a dragon series, and so most of the books that she talked about in her Dragon Books video were the beginnings of series, and so I got into a couple of those series and then just whizzed through them. A lot of what I read this month is what I would call light reading, in that it doesn't emotionally exhaust me. My pile's right here. That's why I'm looking at it. A lot of it, there were some definitely that were emotionally exhausting, but there were a bunch that just were enjoyable, and they were good books in a lot of ways, but they weren't so dramatic like some books are that leave me in a daze for several days and are just need a lot of processing. So I was able to both read them quickly and then move on to the next book very quickly without having to pause to process. So that was a lot of why I got so much reading done this month. In fact, these are all my reads for this month. Actually, -2, because one of them I already sent back to the library and one of them was an ebook. I'm going to start with the ebook and the book that I already returned to the library, because so that way I won't forget about them. The first book that I finished this month, which is the one that I told you about in my What Comes Before May April wrap-up that I was halfway through, so I finished the second half of it during May, and that was River of Stars by Guy Gavriel Kay. And it is a epic novel as far as length and scope and everything, set in China. Here we go. River of Stars is a work shaped by themes, characters, and events associated with China's Northern Song dynasty before and after the fall of Kaifeng. It is an increasingly well-chronicled period, although causes and elements are predictably a matter of dispute. So he took 4 real people: Li, I'm going to butcher these, King Zhao, the best-known female poet in China's history, General Yue Fei, Xu Shi, and his gifted younger brother are 4 of the big main characters, especially the first 2. But they aren't called that. He gave them different names, and so that he could kind of make up their personalities and such. It's just that the main things that they accomplished are based on those 4 people. So as a whole, the book is about this general, based on General Yue Fei and his life, starting when he was about 14, I believe, and when he took his first steps towards becoming a general. He was a second son who was destined to become a clerk of some kind, but he went on a little journey to protect the local sheriff type person, and ended up shooting and killing 6 or 7 bandits who were going to attack them, and then he just disappeared off into the forest and began his life of vigilante slash banditism himself. And the other main character being followed is this woman poet, and how she starts off on her journey. Back then, in this culture, women were very much constrained in what they could do, but she was raised by her father to be very not caring about those restrictions and be very educated and willing to make things move. I won't go into so much what happens as much as what the story is like. It's just the tone and the way it's written is very different for me. I don't know, this Guy Gavriel Kay person apparently writes a lot of stuff based in various foreign cultures. I think he's British, but he writes about Indian history type stuff, and also Chinese history and various other things, so he's really interested in history and anthropology and that kind of thing. And the way he writes, it's very epic a lot of the time, but not in a cringy way at all. There's very little casual interaction or casual much of anything. There's a lot of formality. I think that very much is reflective of the culture that he's talking about. I really loved it. Part of it is I have very much an interest in East Asian history and culture, and this was very much set there. I learned a lot, and but not in a boring kind of way. It was very much all communicated in the midst of telling the story. There were no info dumps or anything like that. Anything that was remotely like an info dump was actually a very craftily told little bit of the story that was important, and it just, the prose was just lovely. I haven't read epic type prose that was that good and not cringy in a long time, if ever. This book does also get some feminism points, because even though a lot of people would say that women weren't important during this era, and so books about this era wouldn't need to include them, he includes a fair number of women, and how despite their being oppressed, they moved events and were they affected a lot of things, and how they were able to affect things even within their constraints. And he also writes a variety of different female characters who have very different personalities from each other, and there are no like stereotypes or placeholders or anything like that. They're all quite vivid and real. And kind of a theme for this month's reading has been endings, because there have been a variety of different types of endings in the books I've been reading / the series I've been reading. This one ended, it's a standalone work, it's not part of a series, but it ended in a very strange and interesting way. Skip ahead if you don't want to know. Basically, the general who is the subject of most of the book ends up being called home from the war and told not to fight anymore because of various political movements. Well, one very big political thing. And he gets thrown in prison for no reason. He's innocent, but he gets thrown in prison, and he is given the option by a local official to either poison himself or walk out of prison and pretend not to exist, basically. Just disappear. The lady poet that is the subject, the other main subject of the book, is his lady love, and so one option is him killing himself for no reason whatsoever, and his other option is to go off and be with her happily ever after. And basically the weird part is the book doesn't really tell you specifically what happens. It gives you some clues, and you can basically twist those to fit whichever you prefer or whichever you think is most likely. And I'm kind of wondering if this was based on us not, or the history people not really knowing what happened, if they in fact don't know whether he died or just disappeared. Obviously, I have figured out in my mind how to interpret what was given to me as he went off and lived happily ever after with his lady love, whereas there are some things that make me think maybe that's not what they were hinting, but I don't care, I'm going to ignore those things. Basically, the main difficulty of this general's is that he has been working to be a general and to do these things all his life to retake this certain area of old China that used to belong to the empire and doesn't anymore, and so it might be more desirable for him to die than to go on living and not be able to work towards those ends, as he wouldn't if he just went off and retired. But I decided that he cared enough about his lady love that he wouldn't do that to her, and he would just go and live with her happily ever after. So, it's a very good book. I really loved it. I highly recommend it. It was gotten for me as a gift from my uncle because he knows I really like Chinese culture and stuff, and he hit a good one. The next thing I read was The City of Brass. And I will put the author's name in the text because I can't remember it and I don't have the book to look at. But it was recommended by Read Between the Wines, and I'll link the video below, but she really, really liked it, and I think she has good taste, so I picked it up, and I didn't realize that it was going to be the first part of I think a trilogy, but at least there's going to be more. And so I wasn't expecting to have such a tumultuous ending. I thought everything was going to get wrapped up, and towards the end, and I was thinking, how are they going to wrap this up this soon? The answer was they weren't. It was just going to get left very tumultuously. It's set in Egypt, and I was kind of confused on the geography because they were talking about the Euphrates, but they were also talking about the Arabian Peninsula, and when I looked at those on the map, they weren't in the same place, but I might be totally confused. But anyway, that kind of Middle Eastern area most of the time, and is basically based on Middle Eastern jinn mythology and D-J-I-N-N, and it was really fascinating because I really never read stuff based on that kind of thing before. Aladdin is basically my only experience with that kind of mythology, and this went way deep, and I'm sure was very much fictionalized as far as making it make sense. I'm sure it was drawn from a bunch of different stories about the jinn and partially made up, but it was very, you could tell that it was very well researched, and it was definitely based on legends that had been made by people other than the author, and it was just really fascinating for me and very much a new experience because I hadn't read stuff like that before. And since I'm linking her video below, I won't really go into what she talked about, but I'll talk about other things that she didn't mention. For one, this was like the second book that I read in the month, and it was one of the tumultuous ones, the dramatic ones that made me have to pause a few days afterward and not read anything else because I was so because this author does quite a good job of making you care about characters who are bad, slash have done bad things, slash are currently doing a thing that is bad, but I still really care about them, and that's not usual for me. I'm not usually the gray, amoral, character-loving person. I like Loki, but I didn't think much of him in the first Avengers. Not the first Avenger, Captain America, but the first Avengers movie. I really like him later on when he's being redeemed. Whereas when he's being a jerk, I'm like, that's a jerk. Go away. But in this case, these particular gray morals characters I really like. The main female character, she doesn't go around killing people like the other two main characters do, but she's a con woman, so she has no problem conning various people. That's fine, and I don't have a problem with her for that, but I do have a problem with the other two doing nasty, awful things. I consider them morally gray, but I don't dislike them. I like them quite a lot, and I care a lot about them. I don't know how exactly she does that in a way that other authors with gray moral characters haven't, or that haven't done that for me. Also a good book. I highly recommend it if you haven't read a lot of Middle Eastern mythology based stuff, and if you don't mind gray moral characters. Another thing that I read this month throughout the month was the Temeraire series, and there's just so much to say about that one that I'm gonna leave it off for another video that I'm gonna film right after this one. So but I will say for just the wrap-up portion that I love the series, I love the characters. I think the love interest, it's a female love interest of a main character who's a guy, and I think she's probably my second favorite female love interest ever. The only people who could possibly compare are Arwen, who's not in the book, and Jasmine from my favorite series that you all know about. If you watched my other videos, Del Toro. So all of these that I'm putting aside are of the Temeraire series. Where's the prettiest cover? This is the last one that I also enjoyed very much, and this is one of the ones that's a cuddler that you know those books you just have to hold like this because you love it so much. And where's one of the paperbacks? Also lovely. See if it'll focus. But they are by Naomi Novik, and she is the same person who wrote Uprooted. She wrote this series before she wrote Uprooted. You can kind of see the similarities between it and Uprooted, even though Uprooted is more of a magical fantasy, whereas in these books, the only magic is that dragons exist and can occasionally breathe fire or spit acid or spit water. There are some similarities, like the fact that her romances are very much mind-based. They're none of that sexual tension crap, or very little of it. They're very much based on friendship, and the people are friends first, and they have a meeting of the minds, and they like to talk about the stuff they have in common. I love it. Also, her characters, even the ones that are only there for a little bit, are just so lovable, and they're all my friends now. Basically, the Temeraire series is set during the Napoleonic Wars, and it centers on a British naval captain who finds a dragon egg and becomes bonded to the dragon, and so then has to transfer to the Aerial Corps, which is the section of the British military that rides dragons and uses dragons for war. And all the countries of the world have dragons, and basically every different book is an excuse to travel to a different country and find out what kind of dragons they have and what they use their dragons for and what different cultural stuff goes on with dragons, and I really appreciate that. The Temeraire series has more variety of dragons and probably quantity than any series I've ever read. Even Dragon Keeper Chronicles, way more crazy. I freaking love Naomi Novik. So moving on, other ones I read early on in the month were these 4 of the Ranger's Apprentice series, which I talked about 2 of, I think, in my last wrap-up. I'm kind of gradually working my way through the series because there's 12 of them. Basically, in this one, the Ranger's Apprentice has now become a full-fledged ranger and goes on his first mission without his master Halt, and he actually goes with his new love interest. A lot of the Ranger's Apprentice books are kind of paired up. Like, the first 2 weren't so much, but the 3rd and 4th one were very much paired, and the 5th and 6th one are very much paired because they are a continuation of each other. In this one, he goes and finds a fake sorcerer in the north who has been scaring the populace away from his little clearing where he and a bunch of other misfits hang out so that no one will disturb them, and finds out all sorts of conspiracies that are going around surrounding this sorcerer. And in this one, they already know, they have figured out all the conspiracies, and now they have to take down the bad guys. The ranger, Will, and his friend, who's they're called couriers, but they're basically spies, which the rangers are also sort of spies, but couriers are more diplomatic spies. They're not supposed to fight, they're just supposed to sneak and exchange codes and stuff like that, whereas the rangers are known, and they're also fighters and leaders. They take command of various areas when need be. So he and his courier spy friend go off to this northern castle where the sorcerer has been reported, and figure out what's going on, and then their knight friend comes up and helps them out with the solving of the problems they've discovered. And then in this one, we go off to the Middle East based area. It's it's almost entirely desert, although it could also be the Sahara base, which is more so northern Africa. I'm not sure if it's more based on northern Africa or the Middle East, but they ride the camels, and they have a bunch of different tribes who have their own things that they want, and motivations, that's what they're called. And so there's basically 3 different types of people taking up the same space, and not very happily, and we end up, our little crew ends up in the middle of it. And in this one we go off to Clonmel, which I don't remember if it reminded me more of Wales or Ireland, but I do have a small complaint about this one. They left all the women home, and they didn't meet any other women characters when they got where they were going, which is he's always, this author in this series has been a 1 to 2 main characters, 1 female to 2 heavy important main characters ratio, and with all the supporting surrounding characters almost entirely being men, at least all the named ones. very occasional woman main character or main side character. In this one, the main female character is the only female character in the entire, after the first, like, chapter. There's several at the beginning sending them off, but there's only one who stays for the whole thing. She's important and valued, and she's a dynamic character who's her own person, and she's not a stereotype or anything, but there's only one. And she's very important. She couldn't be replaced by a sexy lamp. She takes down some bad guys. She's very badass and cool. Just, you know, there's only one. And in these two also there's only one, and she's locked in a tower for a good portion and not able to accomplish anything. So, small problem with that. That's a little irritating, but, you know, I would rather have him write no women than write women grossly, so I'm glad that the women he does represent are done well, and they're not sexistly written at all. He just, I guess, doesn't think of having characters be women. Other than that, I really, really like the books. They're very good. They're quite well researched. I really like all the information about how medieval weapons work and medieval hierarchies, government stuff, and all the research he's done into various historical cultures. They're light reads, they're not very dramatic and very upheaving, and I don't have to take a huge break after I finish one to read other books, because I don't need to process them. They're just, or recover from them. They're just nice, fun things to read. Some books that did cause me some emotional upheaval: Seraphina and Shadowscale by Rachel Hartman. I love them very much. Very, very likable characters, fascinating world. It's about dragons who can turn into people, and they're children, in that it's about half-breeds, and half-breeds are not well liked, and dragons in general are not well liked. And it's about a particular half-breed named Seraphina and her adventures. I really, really liked it. It was fun, enjoyable, dynamic characters, interesting characters, all different, fascinating, creative. Except the ending was somewhat less than I desired. It didn't wrap everything up nice in a bow. First of all, I didn't really realize that it was the beginning of that it would have a sequel, so I was like, oh no, that better not be the real ending. It wasn't. It did have a sequel. Basically, the only thing that was unsettled was a romance, so I figured, oh, the sequel will figure that out. And I also wanted to know all about her discovering these other half-breeds that she's going to seek out. And that sounded really fascinating, because the ones she'd already found were really fascinating and interesting and adorable. So, I very excitedly, when I finished, went and requested the next book from the library. And this is where the problem comes in. Basically, everyone's miserable for most of this one. Not necessarily that everyone's miserable, but there's no intimacy, in that one of the things that I like most about books is when they have good friendships and the friends get to spend a lot of time together. But for the entire book, all the friends that I really cared about from Seraphina were separated from each other either by geographical distance, some of whom weren't even able to call each other, some were able to call each other but some weren't, or mind control separated a bunch of them out so that Seraphina couldn't talk to her friends, because this evil mind control lady might find out what she was saying to them, or might even be in their bodies at any time. And so that was upsetting. I really liked a lot of stuff, like meeting the other half-breeds, discovering their talents, finding out what they were like, but there was this shadow over the whole time. Seraphina not being able to confide in her friends and not being able to spend time with her friends honestly, and having a good time, or even a functional time, because she couldn't like make plans with them or anything. And gorgeous cover though. Isn't that beautiful? And this one's very pretty too. Very pretty covers. It's so unfortunate when you don't like a book with a gorgeous cover. And I really liked they went off to the land where if you've read Serafina, where one of the half-breeds named Abdo comes from, and it's a really cool land with really interesting things going on, really cool culture. We got to learn all sorts of interesting stuff about minds and how they work and how these half-breeds' mind works and why they have these powers and really cool stuff like that. But the whole time I was basically holding out for the happy ending because things were so upsetting. I had to hope that in the end everything would be nice and everybody would be happy again and I'd be able to leave the series having the idea in my mind of them being happy. Well, skip ahead if you don't want spoilers. Everything did not end happily. Some things ended happily, a few things ended happily, but there's a lot of separation and a lot of Orma, who is Serafina's uncle, very important to her. They have a very strong bond. Ended up having his memories erased of her and of his girlfriend Eska, and so and Eska ended up having a kid with another guy, and there's kind of a hint that maybe Orma will eventually get his memories back, but they weren't back by the end of the book, even by the end of the epilogue. And then the romance that wasn't quite settled was sort of settled in that all of the three main characters know about it, but also not settled because the guy that Serafina loves married someone else, and they're just gonna have to, yeah, it wasn't good. It's very upsetting. I mean, it would have been more okay if the rest of the book had been alright, but since I read all that yucky stuff I didn't enjoy, with them all being upset and unhappy, just to get that ending, I was not happy. So that's why I left off reading Tess of the Road, which I had requested and gotten, but it's written by the same author, so not necessarily from anger at the author, but from not trusting her to give me a satisfying ending. And then if it doesn't end the way I like either, why would I read that? That's just gonna be upsetting. Only two more. One is The Fire Within, which is another beginning of a series, but I didn't get the rest of the series because it didn't draw me in nearly as much. It's very much a middle grade, even bordering on that. I'm not sure what the one before that would be. Younger than that. I couldn't really relate to the main character. The stuff he was doing didn't really make sense, but I think I will read the rest of it because I think it'll still be interesting, and it's the sort of thing that I would have liked a lot when I was younger, even if I thought the main character's actions were weird. I still would have liked it a lot, and I want to know what happens next, just not as urgently as I need to know what happened in the Temeraire series next. So I will tell you more about this series when I've read the rest of them. And then this one is the almost last book I read this month. The very last was, where did I put it? This one, so I ended on a very good note. But this one was the second to last book I read, and it was a DNF just because it's not my kind of thing. It's just basically a bunch of horrible people doing nasty things for power, and that's just not my thing. There are dragon riders, I like dragon riders, but didn't like the characters. So, The Adamantine Palace by, his name is covered up with stickers, Stephen Diaz, which is not my thing. So that's what I read this month. I'm sure next month will be a much lighter one. 19 books total this time. I don't think I'll be reading nearly as much next time. I'll probably be finishing up the Ranger's Apprentice series and possibly Fire Within, but I might leave that for a while. I'm also doing a reread of the Del Toro books, so we'll see how far I get into that. And tell me what you read this month, and if you read any of these books, what were your thoughts? I'll see you in the next video. Bye!